If you know me, you know that I am not all that comfortable leaning too heavily on the fact that my dad is who he is. But I promised myself that these videos would be as honest as I could make them, and there's just not a way around the fact that Neil Young lives mostly within the Allman Brothers filter in my brain. To be clear, I'm not talking about the Southern Man, Sweet Home Alabama thing. If you want to know where the Allman Brothers landed on that little spat, just consider that in 2012, the Allman Brothers covered Southern Man. And we'll leave it at that. No, what I'm referring to is partly the performers that Butch interacted with and had stories about, but more along the lines of the artists whose music I actually tended to hear alongside the Allman Brothers. I tend to notice these things. Sure, there are some heavy-duty Southern rock fans out there, but in my experience, most Allman Brothers fans either pair them with Grateful Dead, Phish, Widespread Panic and the Jam bands, or else they pair them with the Freedom Rock types. Hey man, is that Freedom Rock? And that latter definitely includes Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. But since their thing was about the vocal harmonies and not so much about the interesting instrumental things, I didn't pay them much attention. In fact, aside from one Buffalo Springfield album, I never owned anything by any of them. Nothing in my mom's record collection either. And that's where Neil Young's music might have stayed with me, alongside the likes of Hamilton, Joe, Frank, and Reynolds, if not for what happened in the 90s. It started with the resurgence of classic rock in the late 80s, when George Harrison and Bob Dylan and Robbie Robertson and Pink Floyd and all these other different kinds of 60s and 70s artists started releasing albums that were actually getting some serious play. In 1989, I remember seeing Keith Richards on SNL and Little Feat and Tom Petty. And right in the middle of all that resurgence was Neil Young's Harvest Moon. And aside from being a gigantic hit, that one song has the distinction of being eminently fun to make fun of. On this harvest moon. Right on the heels of that resurgence was the grunge phenomenon. Without getting too morbid, I'll just say that it's safe to say there's a whole group of performers that lauded Neil Young as a huge influence, especially Pearl Jam. They dubbed him the godfather of grunge, after all. By contrast, at no point have I ever heard Kim Thayil mention Hamilton, Joe, Frank, or Reynolds. So there's clearly something I'm missing here. First time listening to Harvest. First song. Out on the Weekend. The slow, deliberate, immaculate drums up front with the bass and guitar. It sounded like it could have been pulled off I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight. And then when you add the harmonica, suddenly it's Dylan playing with Richard Thompson. And for a moment at least, I'm hopeful. Fast forward to the third song, A Man Needs a Maid. Midway through, there's suddenly an entire symphony. What, really? We started out so nice. This kind of solo piano, Joni Mitchell's Blue kind of a vibe. And you're going to throw in an entire friggin' orchestra in? Oh, I know. The perfect way to encapsulate a feeling of loneliness and isolation and mistrust. Let's abandon the solo piano and hire 74 musicians. And that's kind of how the rest of my experience with the first listen goes. Sometimes I'm Heart of Gold? Are You Ready for the Country? Old Man? There's a World? Honestly, I'm having a really hard time trying to figure out what Neil Young is trying to impart with this album. Look, when the album is good, it reminds me of something that Bob Dylan once said. He said, I want to learn to play the guitar with no tricks. So that simple, honest, direct songwriting is something that I hear a lot in this album. Although I suppose Neil Young's kind of stuttering sort of acoustic guitar style is a trick in and of itself. Jingle bells, jingle bells. But other times it feels like he has absolutely no idea what he's trying to get across. Man, I hope listening to this a whole bunch of times makes things clearer for me. There's a bit of historic geographic trivia I like to use to stump people with from time to time. If Georgia's borders today followed the borders described in its original charter, you know what the largest city in Georgia would be? It would be Los Angeles. This little piece of trivia keeps coming to mind as I analyze this album. There is, and in fact has been for some time, a sizable portion of LA culture that emulates Southern culture and speech. I can completely picture in my head the people of Laurel Canyon, the beautiful hippies out there with this bit of sublimated Southern identity, whipping out their acoustic guitars and writing songs to try and unknot the cognitive dissonance of, on one hand, feeling an affinity for the South, while on the other hand, being completely outraged by the racist segregationist policies in most southern states in the 60s. And further, I can see Neil Young, fresh from Toronto, T-R-O-N-N-O, Toronto, trying to fit in with his new friends, but feeling like an outsider to all of this. There's evidence of this struggle all over the place. For example, one minute he has James Taylor play banjo on Old Man throughout the whole song. Then the next he's singing about banjo music behind broken windows in Alabama as a sign of their backwardness. But while that helps explain some of the lyric content, the weird little filler tune of Are You Ready for the Country, and even the 11/8 vamp of words. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I still don't know that I can appreciate some of what he produced musically. Harvest feels incomplete in places, inconsistent in places, but mostly it feels directionless. It feels like a debut album with all the ideas he'd come up with over a long period of time coming out all at once. Not his fourth studio album from a musician who had already been a member of 2 wildly successful projects. There are truly beautiful and poignant moments in Harvest, and there are some completely baffling ones. And I usually dig baffling music, but I can't even get a feel for where his baffle is coming from. Overall, I guess I'm glad I know this album now. It certainly makes for good conversation with other musicians, if nothing else. And with that, Happy New Year, everyone. I'll see you next year.